Chapter 1. Architect of Fate. Maxwell Thornton did not forge his formidable empire upon the fragile bedrock of blind trust. As the visionary founder of Thornton Security Systems, he had meticulously spent 2 decades crafting technologies designed to shield others from the encroaching shadows of threat. Yet, in a cruel twist of irony, he had somehow overlooked the insidious peril festering within the very walls of his own home. An October downpour, relentless and unforgiving, hammered against the panoramic windows of his downtown office as he gazed upon the brooding silhouette of Seattle. From this dizzying altitude, the city's myriad lights blurred into a shimmering golden haze diffused by the insistent streams of rain. His phone, a silent sentinel, vibrated discreetly upon his polished desk. "Sir, your wife has called again," his assistant Naomi announced, her voice a calm counterpoint to the storm outside. "She wished to remind you about the dinner tonight with the Polson family." "Tell her I'll be there," Maxwell replied, his voice a carefully modulated monotone, betraying not a whisper of the tempestuous anxiety raging beneath his composed exterior. For 3 long, agonizing months, Maxwell had known with chilling certainty that something was profoundly amiss. Veronica, his wife of 15 years, had undergone a subtle yet seismic transformation. These barely perceptible shifts, like the faint tremor before an earthquake, would have been utterly invisible to anyone else. A sudden, inexplicable change of password on her phone, whispered emergencies at her art gallery in the dead of night, and a newfound chilling interest in solitude. But Maxwell, a man who had dedicated his entire career to perceiving what others tragically overlooked, saw everything. When he finally returned home that evening, their sprawling, opulent lakeside estate was ablaze with light, prepared for the evening's elaborate dinner party. Veronica met him at the grand entrance, her smile a brittle facade that utterly failed to reach the depths of her eyes. "You're late," she murmured, her hands with a disturbing familiarity adjusting his tie. "Traffic," he lied, the word tasting like ash on his tongue, for he had, in truth, been meeting with the enigmatic private investigator Liv Donnelly, reviewing the latest damning surveillance photographs. Inside, their children, 16-year-old Sierra and 14-year-old Colin, barely acknowledged his presence, their gazes utterly fixated on their digital devices. Dinner unfolded with a chilling, practiced precision, Veronica performing the role of the perfect hostess for the unsuspecting Gary and Melinda Polson. "Maxwell, how is your father?" Gary inquired, his voice cutting through the polite hum of conversation between bites of roasted salmon. "I heard his condition has worsened." Maxwell nodded solemnly, a shadow passing over his face. "The doctors give him mere weeks, perhaps even days." "How very sad," Veronica commented, her voice laced with a carefully rehearsed sympathy, a performance chilling in its perfection. "Walter was always so vibrant." Later that night, as the vast house succumbed to the hushed embrace of silence, Maxwell slipped silently into his private study. He unlocked a hidden safe, concealed beneath the floorboards, its existence known to no one but himself. Within lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his own precise, handwritten entries, meticulously tracking every single inconsistency in his family's behavior over the past year. He added the observations from this very night, including the chilling detail of Sierra quietly excusing herself during dinner to take a hushed phone call, anxiously whispering about when everything would change. Maxwell closed the journal, placing it back within the safe with a grave deliberation. His father's impending death would, he knew, accelerate everything. Walter Thornton's immense fortune, combined with Maxwell's own formidable security empire, would soon amount to nearly $1 billion. What Veronica and her shadowy lover failed to comprehend, however, was that Maxwell had spent the preceding 5 years preparing for precisely this calamitous scenario. Not from a baseless paranoia, but because he had witnessed far too many powerful men utterly destroyed by the venomous sting of betrayal. As he secured the safe, his phone vibrated, a single cryptic message from Liv illuminating the darkness. "Confirmed, meeting again tonight. Same place." Maxwell's expression remained impassive, an unyielding mask, but his eyes, once a warm, inviting blue, hardened into a chilling Arctic sapphire. The game, he knew, had finally begun, and he was already several steps ahead, a silent, deadly architect orchestrating their inevitable downfall. Chapter 2. Unraveling Threads. The antiseptic scent of Seattle General Hospital's VIP wing had become a suffocatingly familiar companion over the preceding weeks. Maxwell sat by his father's bedside, a silent vigil, watching as the once powerful industrialist battled for every ragged breath. Walter Thornton, a titan, had built his manufacturing empire from nothing, instilling in his only son an unyielding work ethic and a stark, unwavering philosophy. Trust must be earned, never simply given. "The doctors say you need to rest, Dad," Maxwell murmured, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Walter's gnarled hand, surprisingly strong, squeezed his son's with a startling intensity. "They're circling already, aren't they?" His voice a raspy whisper. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "Who?" "Don't play coy with me, boy. I wasn't born yesterday." The old man's eyes, though clouded by the relentless march of illness and medication, still held the same piercing shrewdness that had intimidated business rivals for decades. "I've seen the way she looks at you now, like you're an asset to be liquidated." Maxwell remained silent, neither confirming nor denying, allowing the heavy silence to hang between them. "Remember what I taught you," Walter continued, his voice gaining a fleeting strength. "The barb in fortune isn't just money, it's power. And power." He took a ragged, shuddering breath. "Power reveals." "I know, Dad. Save your strength." Leaving the oppressive silence of the hospital, Maxwell drove to a nondescript warehouse nestled deep within the industrial district. Inside, amidst rows of humming server racks and an array of monitoring equipment, Tanner Bryce awaited him. The former military intelligence officer had served as Maxwell's head of security for 7 years, and he was the only man Maxwell trusted implicitly without reservation. "How's the old man?" Tanner inquired, his scarred face illuminated by the cold blue glow of computer monitors. "Dying," Maxwell replied bluntly, his voice devoid of emotion. "What have you got for me?" Tanner extended a tablet, its screen displaying a map. "Your wife visited the gallery last night but left after 20 minutes. Her car then proceeded to this address." A highlighted elite downtown apartment building pulsed on the screen. "Preston Davenport's place," Maxwell observed, naming his wife's supposed friend, an art dealer of questionable repute. "They spent 3 hours together. Your daughter is also texting him regularly." Tanner scrolled through message logs, revealing exchanges mostly about things being better soon and inquiries about colleges in Europe. Maxwell's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath his skin. "And my son?" "The boy's been promised a Lamborghini when he turns 16, apparently." Tanner pulled up another screen. "There's more. Your wife has been meeting with Teresa Campbell, a divorce attorney. The best in the state," Tanner confirmed, his voice flat. "And she's been making inquiries about your father's will." Maxwell paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of calculated precision, processing every agonizing shred of information. The betrayal in its essence was anticipated, yet seeing the irrefutable proof, witnessing the chilling depth to which it had permeated, how even his own children had seemingly been turned against him, still sliced through him like a razor-sharp blade. "Didn't you think of just talking to her?" Tanner ventured, a hint of concern in his voice. Maxwell shook his head, a grim determination etched on his features. "Not yet. I need to understand how far this goes." Later that evening, Maxwell returned home to find Sierra meticulously packing a suitcase. "Week-long trip with Mom," she explained curtly when he inquired. "Girls' getaway." "Sounds nice," he replied, noting the way she deliberately avoided eye contact, a tell he couldn't ignore. "Where are you headed?" "Just a spa resort. You wouldn't be interested." Her phone vibrated with an incoming message, and she instinctively angled it away from him. From the corner of his eye, Maxwell caught a fleeting glimpse of Preston's name in the notification. Sierra quickly typed a reply before looking at him with a practiced saccharine smile. "Don't worry about dinner this weekend. Colin's staying at Braden's." After she departed, Maxwell walked to his son's room, tapping lightly before entering. Colin sat hunched over his gaming console, barely acknowledging his father's presence. "Everything all right, pal?" Maxwell asked, his voice softer than before. "Fine," came the curt, dismissive reply. "I thought maybe we could go fishing this weekend like old times." Colin scoffed. "I've got plans with Braden." "Braden?" Maxwell repeated, a flicker of confusion crossing Colin's face before he quickly recovered. "Yes, with Braden," he reiterated, his voice suddenly sharp. Maxwell nodded, the lie as clear as the summer sky. "Have fun." He then closed the door and retreated to his study, where he opened his laptop and accessed a secured server. The GPS trackers he had discreetly installed on his children's phones revealed that Sierra was currently heading to Preston Davenport's apartment, certainly not embarking on any girls' getaway. He pulled up financial records, revealing recent, suspicious transfers from Veronica's personal account to various offshore accounts. The sums were substantial yet meticulously cautious, just below the thresholds that would trigger automatic notifications. More damning still was the series of consultations she had conducted with probate attorneys and financial planners, all specializing in high-net-worth divorce cases. The pieces, like a meticulously crafted puzzle, were falling into place precisely as he had foreseen years ago. Maxwell closed his laptop, pouring himself a measure of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling ominously in the glass. As he contemplated the intricate chess game laid out before him, his adversaries, he knew, believed they were making clever opening moves, utterly unaware that he had already meticulously planned the entire game down to its inevitable, crushing conclusion. He picked up a photograph of his family taken at Christmas, all smiling, a perfect deceiving portrait of happiness. Maxwell placed it face down on the table. In the window's dark reflection, he saw not the successful businessman and family man the world knew, but the calculating strategist his father had relentlessly sculpted him to be. "When people show you who they are," he murmured to himself, the echo of his father's resonant words chillingly clear, "believe them the first time." Chapter 3. The Ultimate Betrayal. The day of Walter Thornton's funeral arrived with an appropriate mournful solemnity. Torrents of rain lashed down, an unrelenting deluge, as mourners, cloaked in somber black, huddled beneath a sea of umbrellas at the graveside. Maxwell stood stoically by the freshly dug earth, his face a carefully constructed mask of dignified grief, while his mind, a relentless cataloger, meticulously recorded every minute detail of his surroundings. Veronica stood rigidly beside him, her hand conspicuously resting upon his arm, her silhouette impeccably draped in designer mourning attire. Sierra and Colin stood a little apart, frequently checking their phones when they mistakenly believed no one was watching. And across the somber gathering, partially obscured by the ancient gnarled oak, Preston Davenport, a shadowy figure, observed the proceedings, ostensibly paying his respects to a former business associate. But Maxwell, with a chilling certainty, knew better. The somber service concluded, and the attendees began to disperse, moving towards their waiting vehicles for the reception at the Grand Thornton estate. As Maxwell turned to leave, his longtime attorney and trusted friend Oliver Walsh approached him, his expression grave. "We need to discuss the will, Max. Your father made some unconventional requests. Can we speak privately before the reception?" Maxwell nodded, his gaze sharp, noting how Veronica's attention immediately sharpened, even as she feigned being engrossed in comforting an elderly aunt. At the Thornton mansion, the mourners mingled in hushed conversations, a low hum of polite condolences as caterers circulated with trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres and sparkling beverages. Maxwell excused himself to join Oliver in his father's former study. Through the partially open door, he caught a fleeting glimpse of Veronica, her fingers flying across her phone, tapping out a frantic message. "Your father's final amendments were unusual," Oliver began as soon as they were alone, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "He insisted on a public reading of the will rather than a private notification, said it was necessary for the process, his exact words." Maxwell allowed a thin, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips. He always had a flair for the dramatic. "There's more." Oliver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Walter left instructions that the reading was to occur precisely 2 hours after the conclusion of the funeral service. He was very specific." Let me guess. Everyone has to be present. Maxwell finished for him, his voice laced with an unsettling prescience. Oliver nodded slowly. Family, key employees, even certain business associates. It's highly irregular, but it's what he wanted, Maxwell finished, his voice cutting through the silence, echoing his father's unwavering will. Proceed as instructed. 2 hours later, the study was filled with the carefully selected guests. Veronica had taken a prominent seat beside Maxwell, Sierra, and Colin, positioned strategically beside her. Preston Davenport, invited as a valued business associate, stood somewhat awkwardly towards the back. Maxwell noted with a detached interest how Sierra continually cast fleeting glances in Preston's direction. Oliver cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room, and began to read the document. First came the standard bequests, charitable donations, sentimental mementos to old friends, specific instructions for the sprawling business empire. Then the heart of the vast fortune was unveiled. The remainder of my assets, including the controlling interest in Thornton Industries and all personal holdings, I hereby bequeath to my son, Maxwell Walter Thornton, to be disposed of at his sole discretion. A ripple of hushed whispers spread through the room. Maxwell remained impassive, though he caught a fleeting flicker of alarm pass between Veronica and Preston, a silent, almost imperceptible exchange. With one specific condition, Oliver continued, his voice gaining a chilling gravitas. Should my son pass away or be deemed incapacitated or otherwise unable to manage these assets within 1 year of my demise, all assets shall revert to my daughter-in-law, Veronica Preston Thornton, for distribution at her discretion between herself and my grandchildren. A profound silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. Maxwell felt Veronica stiffen beside him, her hand suddenly clutching his arm with a false, cloying sympathy. "We need to discuss this privately," she whispered urgently, her eyes wide with a triumphant desperation. "Of course," Maxwell replied calmly, his voice betraying nothing. As the guests slowly began to disperse, Maxwell observed Preston discreetly slipping out, followed shortly by Sierra, who declared she needed some fresh air. In the kitchen, Colin was already on his phone, speaking in hushed, excited tones. Maxwell excused himself and retreated to the master bathroom, locking the door behind him. He checked his watch, precisely on schedule. He sent a pre-drafted message to Tanner, Phase 1 complete. When he returned downstairs, the remaining guests were making their hurried exits. Only the family and Oliver remained. Veronica approached him, her face a mask of manufactured concern. "Maxwell, we need to talk about what this means for us, for the children's future," she began, her voice dripping with a false solicitude. Before he could utter a single word, the doorbell chimed, a shrill, unwelcome sound. When their stoic housekeeper answered, a courier stood there holding a legal envelope. "Delivery for Veronica Thornton," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion. All eyes in the room turned to Veronica as she accepted the envelope with a visible yet fleeting bewilderment. As she tore it open, her expression instantly morphed from perplexity to triumphant, undeniable glee. She pulled out the legal documents, a thick stack of papers, and thrust them towards Maxwell. "Your father's funeral seemed like an appropriate time to end this charade," she declared, her voice suddenly devoid of its previous softness, chillingly cold. "I've filed for divorce. The family fortune is now legally mine, according to Walter's will." Sierra and Colin, twin figures of disdain, stood shoulder to shoulder with their mother, their faces hardened by a shared contemptuous resolve. "We're changing our last name to Davenport," Sierra announced, her voice brittle with a calculated cruelty. "You're dead to us anyway, Mr. Thornton." "Mr. Thornton," the housekeeper interjected softly, her voice strained. "There are reporters gathering outside the gate." Maxwell, with a grim, almost imperceptible satisfaction, understood Veronica's calculated timing. This was orchestrated for maximum public humiliation. A grieving son, losing everything on the day of his father's funeral, would be front-page news across all of Seattle. He simply nodded, his face unreadable, and walked towards the door. As he passed Oliver, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "Initiate Phase 2. Outside, the light rain had resumed, a gentle, sorrowful curtain falling over the scene. Maxwell walked calmly past the waiting throng of reporters, offering no comment, no explanation. He slipped into his car and drove away from the sprawling estate that had been his home for 15 years. In the rearview mirror, he saw Veronica animatedly speaking to the press, her face a triumphant mask of an aggrieved wife, finally gloriously free. What none of them knew, what they could not possibly comprehend, was that everything, from Walter's death to this very moment, had unfolded precisely according to the intricate plan Maxwell had set in motion meticulously years ago. The real game, the true devastating play, had only just begun. Chapter 4. Ash and Shadows. The Silver Lake Motel clung precariously to the outskirts of Seattle, its neon sign a pathetic, flickering beacon in the ceaseless drizzle. Room 117 had become Maxwell Thornton's temporary sanctuary, a stark contrast to his sprawling six-bedroom lakeside mansion with its infinity pool overlooking Puget Sound. The room reeked of industrial-strength cleaner, a thin veil attempting to conceal decades of stale cigarette smoke. Maxwell sat on the edge of the sagging bed, 3 burner phones neatly laid out beside him, each meticulously labeled for different purposes. On the scarred laminate table lay newspaper clippings and tabloid printouts. Tech security titan served divorce papers at father's funeral. Thornton children disown father. He was never there for us. Veronica Thornton alleges emotional abuse in scandalous lawsuit. Maxwell's face remained impassive, an unyielding mask as he perused each damning headline. He had withdrawn precisely $9,000 from various ATMs, just beneath the reporting threshold, before Veronica's legal team could successfully freeze his accounts. His credit cards were now utterly useless, his supposedly joint bank accounts suddenly terrifyingly inaccessible. A sharp knock on the door jolted him from his grim contemplation. He checked the peephole, a sliver of cautious observation before opening the door to admit Tanner Bryce. "You look like hell," Tanner observed, dropping a worn duffel bag onto the stained carpet. "All part of the show," Maxwell replied, a faint, dry amusement in his voice. "Any news?" Tanner pulled out a laptop, its screen aglow against the dimness of the room. "Veronica's already moved Preston into the house. They've been seen celebrating at Camelot's Allure, all the high-end spots. The press is eating it up, the victim finally finding happiness." Maxwell nodded, unsurprised, his gaze distant. "And the children?" "Sierra posted about her new beginnings with her real dad on social media. Colin's flaunting a new Rolex Preston bought him." "The company?" "The board's rattled. Your absence and the media circus have spooked investors. Stock dropped 12% at opening." "Perfect," Maxwell murmured, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Tanner raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "You anticipated this?" "I calculated it," Maxwell corrected, pulling open the duffel bag to reveal stacks of cash, a new phone, and a sheaf of documents. "Everything set with Helena?" "Yes, she's ready to testify about Preston's past business practices when the time comes, but she's nervous. His reputation for vindictiveness isn't exaggerated." Maxwell checked his watch. "And Oliver?" "Taking calls nonstop. Veronica's team is pushing for expedited orders to gain control of everything, based on your departure and unstable mental state following your father's death." A thin, almost imperceptible smile touched Maxwell's lips. "Right on schedule." The following morning, Maxwell appeared disheveled and unshaven for his meeting with Oliver at a quiet coffee shop across town. A few patrons recognized him, whispering quietly and subtly pointing. "You need to pull yourself together," Oliver hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Teresa Campbell is arguing your behavior proves you're unfit to manage the fortune. If the judge agrees, Veronica gets everything based on the condition in your father's will." "What's the timeline?" Maxwell asked, deliberately slurring his words ever so slightly as a neighboring customer cast a quick glance in their direction. "Emergency hearing next week. They're fast-tracking everything." "While you—" Oliver waved a hand vaguely at Maxwell's unkempt appearance. "Good," Maxwell whispered, his eyes suddenly sharp and focused, the mask of dishevelment momentarily slipping. "Make sure you file standard objections, but don't push too hard. We need their overconfidence." Oliver lowered his voice even further. The offshore accounts are secure. They know nothing about Switzerland or the Caymans. But Max, are you sure about this? Once we let them gain control of Thornton Industries, they won't destroy what they believe will make them rich, Maxwell interjected, his voice firm. Preston's too greedy for that. Later that same day, Maxwell drove to an industrial zone in South Seattle, parking behind a nondescript warehouse bearing the faded sign, BD Electronics. Inside, after navigating through security doors requiring multiple access codes, he entered a state-of-the-art command center that would impress even seasoned military contractors. Liv Donnelly looked up from a bank of humming monitors. They're moving faster than anticipated. Veronica has gained temporary access to your personal accounts based on the loss of community property and the special account. Liv smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. They don't know it exists. Maxwell sank into a chair. The transformation from the broken man in the coffee shop to the calculating strategist immediate and profound. On the screen surrounding him, surveillance footage streamed from various locations. His former home, where Preston was hosting a poolside party, Preston's downtown apartment, now conspicuously empty, the offices of Thornton Industries, where executives conferred with worried expressions. "Initiate Phase 3, Maxwell commanded, his voice cold and resolute. It's time Veronica learned some inheritances come with hidden costs. A week later, Maxwell deliberately missed the emergency hearing. Oliver called him immediately, his voice a frantic mixture of frustration and alarm. "It all went exactly as you predicted," the attorney reported, relief and apprehension battling in his tone. "Judge Watkins granted Veronica temporary control based on your non-appearance and the disturbing reports about your mental state. They're celebrating at the mansion right now. Is the package ready?" Maxwell's voice was low, laced with an unsettling calm. "Yes, but Max, this crosses a line. If anyone ever finds out, they won't—" Maxwell cut him off, his voice flat, unwavering. "Deliver it tonight, as we agreed." That evening, as Veronica hosted an impromptu victory party, a courier arrived bearing a sealed legal envelope addressed specifically to her. Inside lay a single sheet of paper with an account number and password, along with a chillingly terse handwritten note. "The true Thornton fortune. Access before midnight or lose it forever." Veronica excused herself, a predatory gleam in her eyes, and rushed to her study, logging into the account with trembling fingers. The balance displayed a staggering $212 million, far more than the publicly known Thornton assets were worth. As she stared at the screen, a message flashed. "Transfer initiated. Confirmation required." Without a flicker of hesitation, she entered her personal identification details and authorized the transfer to the specified account, one she believed was securely under her control. The screen flashed a confirmation before going dark. When she tried to log in again, the account simply no longer existed. In his command center, Maxwell watched through hidden cameras as Veronica frantically dialed her attorney, her face contorted with burgeoning panic. He turned to Liv. "How long before she realizes the money was never real?" "The money was never real, Liv. But she just gave us all the confirmation we needed to document the attempted unauthorized access and wire fraud. The account is flagged with the federal authorities." Maxwell nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes, a grim amusement playing on his lips. And now we wait. Chapter 5. The Tangled Web. The auction drew a modest crowd of curious onlookers and serious buyers alike. Beneath the sterile glow of the hotel conference room's fluorescent lights, items from the Thornton estate were meticulously arranged, each assigned a number. Furniture, artwork, electronics, and the glittering jewelry accumulated over 15 years of marriage. From the back of the room, cloaked in a baseball cap and nondescript clothing, Maxwell watched as Veronica's cherished possessions were sold for fractions of their true value. The court-ordered liquidation to satisfy creditors was a humiliating process, exacerbated by the hushed whispers and gossiping spectators. "I heard she's living in a 2-bedroom apartment now," one woman whispered conspiratorially to her companion. "And he moved to California, couldn't stand the humiliation." Maxwell offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The carefully crafted rumors were spreading precisely as planned. The auctioneer held aloft a platinum wedding band. Lot 37, a gentleman's wedding band with diamond inlay. Starting bid, $500. Maxwell watched dispassionately as his former wedding ring was sold for $750 to a pawnshop owner. The symbolism was not lost on him. The last visible tether to his old life irrevocably severed in mere seconds. Outside the auction house, Maxwell slipped into a waiting car where Tanner sat behind the wheel. "How did it go?" Tanner asked, his voice neutral. "Predictably," Maxwell replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "What's the status on Preston?" "The board meeting just concluded. They've suspended him indefinitely while the investigation continues. 3 major clients have canceled contracts in the last week. The company's value has plummeted by 64% since he took control, and our friends at the FBI are methodically building their case. The paper trail Veronica created, attempting to access that phantom account, is priceless. They've expanded the investigation to include Preston's previous business dealings." Maxwell nodded, a grim satisfaction playing on his lips. Time to vanish completely. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Defeat. The following morning, Seattle's news outlets blared the shocking revelation that Maxwell Thornton had seemingly fled the country. Border records purportedly showed him boarding a flight to Switzerland, and financial experts speculated he was attempting to access hidden accounts before authorities could freeze them. In reality, Maxwell had settled into a modest cabin on Washington's Olympic Peninsula, accessible only by a private road and shielded from satellite imagery by a dense canopy of ancient trees. The property, acquired through a labyrinth of shell corporations years ago, was registered to a non-existent elderly couple from Montana. For the next 2 weeks, Maxwell maintained an absolute communication blackout, while Tanner and Liv monitored the unfolding chaos in Seattle. The meticulously crafted narrative continued to unfold. Maxwell Thornton, once a revered business leader, had shirked his responsibilities and fled from justice, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Meanwhile, Preston Davenport's financial and legal woes multiplied with every agonizing day. Without access to Maxwell's true resources and intricate knowledge, he made increasingly desperate attempts to salvage Thornton Industries, leveraging everything he possessed as collateral for emergency loans. Veronica, facing her own mounting legal troubles from the fraudulent account access, lashed out at Preston, accusing him of instigating her actions. Their relationship deteriorated into public screaming matches, eagerly captured by opportunistic paparazzi. The children, Sierra and Colin, retreated from social media as former friends abandoned them and the barrage of online trolls intensified. On the 17th day of his disappearance, Maxwell received his first update from Tanner via a secure satellite link. "Everything is proceeding as planned," Tanner reported. "The government investigation has broadened to include tax evasion. Veronica's gallery is undergoing an audit. Preston's previous company is now under intense scrutiny for accounting irregularities. As for the children, Sierra's European university ambitions have crumbled. Colin was caught with alcohol again. He's been suspended from school. Both are now living with Veronica in a rented apartment in Bellevue. Preston moved out last week after their public shouting match at La Cote, which made the society pages." Maxwell silently processed the information, his face unreadable. "And Project Harbinger? Still secure and progressing on schedule. The team believes they'll have a working prototype within a few months." "Excellent. Prepare for my return." 2 days later, the Seattle Times published a shocking exposé revealing that Preston Davenport had been previously investigated for securities fraud at his former company. Though no charges had ever been filed, the article insinuated that his relationship with Veronica had begun when he consulted on art for her office, nearly 2 years before the divorce. Even more devastating were leaked text messages between Veronica and Preston, discussing how to expedite access to the Thornton fortune, with explicit references to Walter Thornton's failing health and the conditions of the inheritance. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Overnight, the narrative flipped. Maxwell Thornton was no longer the villain who abandoned his family, but a potential victim of a meticulously planned conspiracy. Veronica's phone rang incessantly, Not with calls of support, but from journalists seeking comment and former friends expressing shock and disgust. Sierra and Colin faced a fresh wave of bullying, now accused of complicity in a scheme against their own father. Preston, already struggling for his professional survival, found himself branded as a predator who had targeted a wealthy family. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Preston arrived at Thornton Industries to find his keycard deactivated. The board had voted unanimously to terminate his employment and cooperate fully with federal investigators. As security escorted him from the building, employees watched from their cubicles, some openly smirking at his downfall. That evening, as Veronica and the children ate takeout in their sparsely furnished apartment, the doorbell chimed. A courier handed a sealed legal envelope addressed to all three of them. Inside was a simple note and a USB stick. "You chose your side. Now live with it." Veronica's hands trembled as she inserted the USB into her laptop. A video began to play, surveillance footage from their former home, capturing dozens of private conversations over the past 2 years. Conversations about Maxwell, about Walter's money, about getting what they deserved. Most devastating were the clips of Sierra and Colin laughing with Preston about their pathetic dad and discussing how they would spend their inheritance once Veronica gained control. "He has everything," Veronica whispered, her face ashen, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "He's been watching us this entire time." Sierra snatched the laptop. "We need to destroy this. If this gets out, then—" "Too late," Colin interrupted, pointing at the screen, where a message now flashed. "Copies provided to relevant authorities and media outlets. Broadcast begins tomorrow." In the silent moments that followed, each of them grasped the same terrible truth. Maxwell had not fled in defeat. He had not been destroyed by their betrayal. He had orchestrated it all, leading them, step by agonizing step, into a trap of their own making. Veronica lunged for her phone, frantically dialing her attorney. The call immediately went to voicemail. One by one, she tried other numbers, her financial advisor, friends, even Preston, all with the same result. It was as if an invisible wall had suddenly risen around them, cutting them off from any potential allies. "What's happening?" Sierra demanded, her voice rising in a desperate crescendo of panic. Veronica had no answer, but across the city, in a private dining room of Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, Maxwell Thornton was ending his self-imposed exile, hosting a dinner for select business partners and media representatives. Impeccably dressed and exuding a calm confidence, he raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he simply stated. The trap had sprung. The game was entering its final phase. Chapter 7. The Architect Unveiled. Dawn broke over Seattle with the rhythmic drumming of rain against windows, a sound that quickly became background noise to the media storm engulfing the city. Every local station and major news website ran the same explosive story: the Thornton conspiracy exposed. Leaked surveillance videos revealed Veronica, Preston, and even the Thornton children plotting for months, discussing Walter Thornton's death as an opportunity, calculating how to maximize their gains from the family fortune. A timestamp on one particularly damning clip, recorded 3 days before the divorce papers were served at the funeral, showed Preston instructing Veronica on what to say. "Your family fortune is now legally mine. Make it hurt." In her Bellevue apartment, Veronica sat motionless on the sofa, surrounded by empty wine bottles, watching her reputation crumble in real time. Her phone rang incessantly, not with calls of support, but from journalists seeking comment and former friends expressing shock and disgust. Sierra emerged from her bedroom, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from tears. "My social media accounts are flooded with hate messages. People are calling us gold diggers and worse." "Where's your brother?" Veronica asked listlessly, her gaze fixed on the television. "Still asleep. He took something last night." Sierra didn't finish the sentence. After they watched more videos revealing the full extent of their betrayal, Colin had raided the liquor cabinet and vanished into his room. The doorbell chimed, startling them both. Veronica cautiously approached and peered through the peephole. A tall woman in a severe suit stood outside, flanked by 2 men with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. "Veronica Thornton," the woman inquired when the door finally opened. I'm Special Agent Diana Winters, FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft by deception. As agents led a stunned Veronica away in handcuffs, Sierra froze in the doorway. Across the hall, a neighbor filmed the entire scene on their phone, undoubtedly adding to the already circulating viral content. Across the city, in his downtown apartment, Preston Davenport was enduring his own moment of reckoning. Federal agents were meticulously packing documents and electronics while his attorney futilely argued the scope of the search warrant. "This is harassment," Preston shouted as agents uncovered a hidden safe behind a bookshelf. "Maxwell Thornton is setting me up." Agent Winters offered a thin, knowing smile. "Mr. Davenport, we've been investigating your financial activities for over 3 years. Mr. Thornton merely provided additional evidence to corroborate our existing case." Preston's face drained of all color. 3 years? That's impossible. I only met Veronica 2 years ago. "It's interesting that your mind immediately jumped to Veronica Thornton," the agent observed, her voice subtly laced with an ironic amusement. "We were actually referring to irregularities in your previous company, Davenport Solutions. But please continue making connections for us." At Thornton Industries headquarters, employees gathered around monitors in the atrium, watching the live news coverage of the unfolding scandal. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd as the main doors swung open, and Maxwell Thornton walked in, flanked by Oliver Walsh and several board members. Maxwell paused, surveying the stunned faces before him. "I think we have work to do," he stated calmly, his voice resonating with quiet authority. Hours later, after a whirlwind of meetings with executives and key team leaders, Maxwell settled into his reclaimed office. The view of the Seattle skyline remained unchanged, though everything else had been utterly transformed. Oliver sat opposite him, perusing documents. "The emergency board meeting was unanimous," Oliver reported, his voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. "You've been reinstated as CEO with expanded authority to stabilize the company. Stock jumped 15% after the announcement." Maxwell nodded, a subtle tightening of his jaw. "And Project Harbinger?" "Untouched. Preston never even knew of its existence." "Perfect." Maxwell turned to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "What's the status of the federal cases?" "Moving swiftly, the evidence is overwhelming. Preston's previous legal troubles make him particularly vulnerable. Prosecutors are already talking about a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Veronica. Both will serve time." "And my children?" Oliver hesitated, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "They haven't been charged, but it's bad, Max. Their involvement was clearly documented in the videos. Sierra's university acceptance offers have been rescinded. Collins School is considering expulsion. They're essentially outcasts." A muscle in Maxwell's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "They made their choices." "They're still your children," Oliver said softly, his voice imbued with a rare empathy. "Teenagers who were manipulated by adults they trusted." "Everyone has a choice," Maxwell replied coldly, his voice a chilling monotone. "They chose Preston and everything he promised them." That evening, Maxwell returned to the penthouse he had secretly maintained for years, a luxurious space unknown to Veronica or the children. Tanner and Liv waited with updates on the day's events. "Preston's lawyer is trying to negotiate," Tanner reported. "He's offering to reveal further details of the conspiracy in exchange for leniency." "Decline," Maxwell replied without hesitation. "He has nothing we need." Liv hesitated before speaking, a subtle unease in her posture. "There's something else you should know. Colin tried to contact you through the company website. The message was flagged by our systems." Maxwell raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "What did it say?" Liv extended a tablet. The message was brief. "Dad, please. We didn't understand what was happening. Can we talk?" For a fleeting moment, something flickered across Maxwell's face as he looked at the name Colin. Perhaps a doubt, perhaps a pang of pain before the mask of control returned. No response required. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Maxwell stood by the window, gazing at the city lights. In his hand was an old photograph of Sierra and Colin as small children, laughing as he pushed them on a swing. He studied it for a moment before returning it to a drawer. His phone beeped with a news alert. Preston Davenport released on $2 million bail. Maxwell offered a thin, almost imperceptible smile and sent a message to an untraceable number. Spider has left the web. Proceed. Across the city, at an exclusive hotel where Preston had taken refuge from the media cameras, a hotel staff member delivered a yellow envelope to his room. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chess notation, checkmate in 3 moves. Preston crumpled the paper, his hands trembling with a potent cocktail of rage and fear. The game, he knew with chilling certainty, was far from over. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. The Emerald Lounge, perched atop Seattle's Columbia Tower, offered breathtaking panoramic views of the sprawling city, the serene Puget Sound, and on a clear day, the majestic Olympic Mountains beyond. Today, however, Preston Davenport saw none of it, hunched over his 3rd scotch, compulsively checking his phone for updates from his legal team. When the bar stool beside him was occupied, he didn't lift his head until a familiar voice ordered a Macallan 25 neat. Preston's head snapped up sharply to discover Maxwell Thornton seated next to him, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that made Preston's own designer attire suddenly feel cheap and ill-fitting. "You," Preston hissed, his voice thick with venom, "you have the audacity to show your face." Maxwell accepted his scotch from the bartender with a polite, appreciative nod. An interesting choice of words from a man who moved into my home and tried to steal my company. "I'm facing federal charges because of you." "No," Maxwell corrected calmly, his voice a chillingly level tone. "You're facing federal charges because of your own actions, actions that began long before you ever met my wife." Preston's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine confusion mingling with his rage. "What are you talking about?" "Davenport Solutions, 2019. The Department of Defense contract that mysteriously fell into your lap after you spent a weekend in Aspen with Senator Harrington's aide. The subsequent overstating of performance metrics to secure additional funding. The offshore account in Belize where your consulting fees conveniently accumulated." The blood drained from Preston's face, leaving him pale and shaken. "How could you possibly know that?" "I know everything about you, Preston. I knew who you were even before you met Veronica." Maxwell took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch, savoring the liquid. "Did you truly believe it was a coincidence that you happened to show up at her gallery that day? That out of all the art consultants in Seattle, she just happened to connect with you?" A dawning, terrifying realization flickered in Preston's eyes. "You set this whole thing up from the beginning." "Not everything. I didn't force you to seduce my wife. I didn't compel you to manipulate my children against me. I simply created an opportunity and observed what you would do with it." "Why?" Preston demanded, his voice a raw whisper of desperation. "Why go through all this?" Maxwell's blue eyes hardened, turning to chips of glacial ice. 3 years ago, I discovered irregularities in my company's government contracts. Minor but significant discrepancies that could have cost us millions and jeopardized our security clearances. The trail led to a mole within Thornton Industries. Someone was feeding information to a competitor. He paused, taking another deliberate sip of his drink. That competitor was Davenport Solutions, your company, your operation. Preston shook his head in frantic denial. "That's absurd. I would have known." "Would you?" Maxwell interjected, a cold amusement in his voice. "You were too busy enjoying the profits to question where the data was coming from. But I questioned everything. That's why I created a trap. A false security vulnerability that, if exploited, would have catastrophic consequences. When your team attempted to use it against a government client, I had my proof." "You could have just turned me in," Preston said, his voice barely audible, laced with a desperate plea, "and risk a public scandal that would erode trust in my company's security systems?" "No, I needed something more comprehensive." Maxwell finished his scotch, deliberately setting the glass down with a soft click. "I needed to understand the full scope of the threat, so I began to observe you, to study you. I learned about your financial troubles, your desperation to maintain your lifestyle despite your company's struggles. Preston swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. So you used Veronica as bait. I simply removed certain safeguards and observed what would naturally occur. Your reputation for coveting others' possessions preceded you. Veronica was unhappy, restless. The attraction was predictable. You're insane, Preston whispered, his voice trembling. No, Maxwell corrected, a chilling precision in his tone. I'm methodical. That's the difference. Preston reached for his drink with a trembling hand. What do you want from me now? Why are you here? Maxwell glanced at his watch. A subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. At this very moment, federal agents are conducting additional searches of storage facilities registered to shell corporations linked to your former CFO. They will find evidence that will secure you at least 15 years in federal prison. He rose, adjusting his cuffs with an air of detached elegance. I'm here as a courtesy to inform you that there is an alternative. What alternative? A private jet is waiting at Boeing Field. It will take you anywhere outside of U.S. jurisdiction. You have sufficient funds in your Belize account to disappear comfortably. The authorities don't know about that specific account yet. By the time they do, you'll be well established elsewhere under a new identity that my associates have prepared. Preston stared in disbelief, his mind reeling. Why would you help me escape? I'm not helping you escape. I'm giving you a choice. Prison, where you'll eventually testify against Veronica to save yourself, or exile, where you will never again have contact with any member of my family. Maxwell's voice turned to ice, each word a cold, sharp blade. Either way, you will be removed from the equation. What if I refuse both options? What if I go public with what you've told me today? Maxwell smiled faintly, a chillingly subtle expression. Who would believe you? The desperate accusations of a man facing multiple federal indictments. Besides, you have precisely 43 minutes before the FBI finds the evidence that will negate any possibility of bail. Preston's shoulders sagged in utter defeat. You thought of everything. Not everything, Maxwell replied, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I never anticipated how far you would go with my children. That was unexpected. For a brief, agonizing moment, something akin to genuine emotion flickered across Maxwell's face. Sierra and Colin became collateral damage in a war they didn't understand. For that, I hold you personally responsible. Preston blanched at the cold fury hidden beneath Maxwell's controlled tone. The jet departs in 90 minutes, with or without you, Maxwell continued, placing a keycard on the bar. That grants access to the private elevator to the helipad. A helicopter is waiting to take you to the airfield. He turned to leave, then paused. And one last thing. The pilot has instructions to divert to a U.S. airfield if I do not send a specific confirmation within 2 hours. Choose quickly, but choose wisely. As Maxwell walked away, Preston called after him, his voice ragged. What about Veronica? Does she get the same offer? Maxwell did not turn back. Veronica made her choice. Now she lives with the consequences. Across the city, in a federal holding facility, Veronica sat in an interrogation room with her court-appointed attorney. Her designer clothes had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Her meticulously styled hair was now limp and unwashed. The prosecution has a very strong case, the attorney explained, his voice grim. Surveillance videos, financial records, documented attempts to fraudulently access accounts. It's overwhelming. Maxwell set me up, Veronica insisted, her voice rising in a desperate plea. He orchestrated everything. Mrs. Thornton, the attorney interjected, his voice firm. The videos clearly show you discussing these plans months in advance. Your voice, your words, in your home. What about my children? Where are they? Your daughter, Sierra, is staying with your sister. Your son, Colin, was placed in temporary foster care after an incident at your sister's home. The attorney hesitated, his voice softening slightly. There's something else you should know. Mr. Thornton has filed for sole custody, citing abandonment and parental alienation. Veronica's face crumpled, her composure finally shattering. He can't take my children. Given the evidence and their ages, the court will likely consider their preferences, and right now, the attorney left the implication hanging in the air, a heavy, unspoken truth. They blame me, Veronica whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. The prosecution has offered a plea deal, 10 years instead of 25, if you testify against Preston Davenport. Veronica stared blankly at the wall, her mind replaying moments from the past few years. The barely perceptible warnings she'd missed, the questions from Maxwell that seemed innocent at the time but now revealed a calculated gathering of information, the safe in his study she could never access, the unexpected business trips that coincided with her meetings with Preston. He was always 3 steps ahead, she murmured, a chilling realization. Always. Miles away in his aunt's suburban home, Colin Thornton sat on the edge of the guest room bed, staring at his phone. The screen displayed a message he had sent hours ago to his father. "Dad, please, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what was happening." The message showed as delivered but unread. Colin had sent dozens of similar messages over the past few weeks, each met with the same digital silence. His door opened and Sierra entered, her face etched with exhaustion. "Aunt Catherine wants to know if you're coming down for dinner." "I'm not hungry." Sierra sat beside him on the bed. "Any reply?" Colin shook his head, a hollow ache in his chest. "He's never going to forgive us, is he?" Sierra's voice cracked slightly. "Would you, if you were him?" "We called him pathetic," Colin said bitterly. "Said we were changing our last name, that he was dead to us, and it's all on video for the whole world to see." Sierra wiped away a tear. "Preston manipulated us, made us believe Dad never cared. We were stupid enough to believe him. We were kids who believed what they wanted to hear." Sierra looked out the window, her gaze distant. "I had a full scholarship to Stanford, you know, before all this. Now no school will touch me with this scandal attached to my name." Colin's phone suddenly chimed with an incoming message. Both teenagers froze, then lunged for the device. The message was not from their father, but from an unknown number. "Columbia Tower rooftop. 1 hour. Come alone if you want answers. T." "Who's T?" Sierra asked, her voice laced with apprehension. "No idea." Colin was already reaching for his jacket, a spark of desperate hope in his eyes. "But I'm going." "Not alone," Sierra declared, her voice firm, resolute. "We've made enough mistakes separately. We'll do this together." An hour later, the Thornton siblings emerged from the elevator onto the Columbia Tower observation deck, sealed to the public at this late hour, yet mysteriously accessible by their ordinary key cards. The night was clear, the lights of Seattle sprawling beneath them like a glittering tapestry of stars. At the far end of the deck, a man stood, observing the harbor. "Mr. Bryce?" Colin called out tentatively, recognizing his father's head of security. Tanner Bryce turned, his scarred face impassive, unreadable. "You came. Both of you." "Are you here for Dad?" Sierra asked, a tremor in her voice. "Did he send you?" "No," Tanner replied, his voice low and steady. "He doesn't know I'm here, and it needs to stay that way." "Then why did you contact us?" Colin demanded, his voice a mix of desperation and defiance. "Because you deserve to understand what happened. The whole story, not just the parts your father allowed to be made public." For the next 30 minutes, Tanner meticulously explained the intricate chess game Maxwell had played for years, how he had suspected Preston's industrial espionage long before Veronica's infidelity, how he had engineered a trap that would expose every disloyal individual in his orbit. "Your father didn't just want to expose Preston's illegal activities," Tanner explained, his gaze unwavering. "He wanted to know who he could truly trust. Unfortunately, that test extended to his family as well." "He was testing us?" Sierra's voice rose in disbelief, tinged with a fresh wave of hurt. "His own children." "He gave you opportunities to choose a side," Tanner corrected, his voice firm but not accusatory. "Multiple chances to demonstrate loyalty. Instead—" "We failed," Colin finished softly, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "Every single time." Tanner nodded solemnly. Your father is a man who values loyalty above all else. The betrayal by his children cut deeper than anything Veronica or Preston did. Is there any way to fix this? Sierra asked, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked with despair. To undo it? Tanner hesitated, his gaze distant. Your father filed for custody, despite everything. That suggests something remains. But understand this. Maxwell Thornton never forgives betrayal. The best you can hope for is that he can eventually move past it if there's enough reason. What do we do? Colin asked, his voice barely a whisper. That's up to you. Do you want his forgiveness or his respect? Tanner checked his watch, a subtle cue. I need to go. I've already said more than I should. He handed each of them a business card, bearing only a phone number. If you decide you want to try, call that number, but only if you're serious. Your father doesn't do second chances. As Tanner walked away, Sierra called after him, a desperate plea in her voice. Is he happy now without us? Tanner stopped but did not turn around. Your father is never happy, Miss Thornton. He is content or discontent. Right now, he is simply focused on rebuilding what was broken. With those cryptic words, he disappeared into the elevator. The siblings stood in silence, gazing out at the city lights. What do we do now? Colin asked, after a long, profound silence. Sierra gripped the railing tightly, her expression hardening with a newfound resolve. We stop being victims. We take responsibility and prove to him that we are Thorntons, not what Preston tried to make us. Beneath them, the city continued its rhythmic pulse, oblivious to the family drama unfolding high above. And somewhere in that sprawling landscape of lights, Maxwell Thornton sat alone in his penthouse, reviewing the surveillance footage from the apartment where his children now lived, listening to every word of their conversation with Tanner through hidden microphones. His expression betrayed nothing as he closed his laptop, leaving their fate and his decision unresolved in the darkness. Chapter 9. Ashes and Rebirth. 3 months later, Seattle's financial district buzzed with anticipation. Thornton Industries stock had not only recovered but soared to unprecedented heights following the announcement of the revolutionary Harbinger security system, a quantum encryption protocol that rendered digital communications virtually unhackable. In the gleaming glass headquarters, Maxwell sat reviewing quarterly reports when Oliver entered with the day's newspapers. The headline screamed the story of Preston Davenport's capture in Bali after attempting to flee to a non-extradition country. His private jet had mysteriously diverted to a U.S. airfield where federal agents had been waiting. I thought you gave him a chance to escape, Oliver remarked, laying the newspapers on Maxwell's desk. I gave him a choice, Maxwell corrected, his voice flat. He chose to violate my terms by attempting to contact Veronica before departing. Actions have consequences. Oliver nodded, having long accepted his friend's unforgiving nature. The custody hearing is tomorrow. Maxwell's expression remained neutral, unreadable. Yes, the children submitted character statements. Do you want to read them? No. Their actions will speak louder than any prepared statements. Oliver hesitated, a touch of genuine concern in his voice. They've both been working. You know, Sierra volunteering at a downtown youth shelter, Colin doing repair work at his school to pay for the damage from his previous incidents. I am aware. Of course you are aware. Oliver sighed, a sound of subtle exasperation. Will you at least consider speaking to them before the hearing? Maxwell turned to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, his gaze distant. That will be all, Oliver. Later that evening, Maxwell drove to a secluded restaurant in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The exclusive establishment, accessible only by a private road, catered to clientele who valued absolute discretion. He was led to a table overlooking a waterfall where Tanner was already waiting. Everything is set for tomorrow, Tanner reported after the waiter had departed, his voice low and concise. Veronica has accepted a plea deal. 15 years with the possibility of parole after 8. The divorce is final. Maxwell nodded, his face devoid of emotion. And Preston? Facing numerous federal charges, plus additional counts related to his escape attempt. His assets are frozen, He's fully cooperating, hoping for leniency he won't receive. Maxwell noted this with a cold satisfaction. Tanner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There's something else you should know. I spoke with your children 3 months ago. Maxwell's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. You monitored them as instructed? Yes. They have complied with every condition you set through Oliver. No attempts to contact, no press interviews, focused on their education and making amends. But Tanner looked directly into his employer's eyes, his own reflecting a rare vulnerability. They're still your children, Max. They made terrible mistakes, but they were manipulated by adults they trusted. At some point, this has to end. Maxwell's expression hardened, an impenetrable shield descending. It will end when I decide it ends. And when will that be? Tanner asked, his scarred face etched with genuine concern. After you've punished them enough? After they've suffered enough? How much penance is enough? For a long, agonizing moment, Maxwell remained silent. The only sound was the distant roar of the waterfall outside. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. They stood at my father's grave and told me I was dead to them. How does one measure a response to that? By remembering they were children, lost children. Maxwell took a sip of water, his expression unreadable, and then, with a subtle shift in tone, signaled the end of the conversation. I need to prepare for the hearing. We will continue this discussion another time. The following morning, low clouds hung heavy over the King County Courthouse as Maxwell arrived for the custody hearing. Media cameras tracked his progress from car to entrance, but he moved with a practiced indifference to their shouted questions. Inside, the courtroom was closed to the press. Maxwell sat alone at one table, Oliver beside him with documentation in neat stacks. Across the aisle, Sierra and Colin sat at another table with the court-appointed guardian. Both teenagers were dressed in conservative clothes that couldn't quite conceal their anxiety. When the judge entered, the formalities proceeded efficiently. Given the circumstances, Veronica's incarceration and the children's ages, the hearing was largely procedural. 17-year-old Sierra would soon age out of the custody system regardless. 15-year-old Colin had less than 3 years until adulthood. Before I rule, the judge announced, her voice clear and authoritative, I would like to hear from the minors themselves. She turned to Sierra. Ms. Thornton, do you wish to make a statement? Sierra stood, her hands trembling slightly as she addressed the judge, not her father. Your Honor, I prepared a statement, but I would like to speak from the heart. She took a deep, shaky breath. 3 months ago, I stood in a funeral home and told my father that I was dead to him. I said cruel, awful things that I can never take back, things I am now profoundly ashamed of. Her voice wavered but steadied as she continued. I was manipulated by people I trusted, but that is no excuse. I made choices, terrible choices, and I hurt the only person who has always protected me. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive myself. But I am my father's daughter, and Thorntons face consequences. I am ready to face mine, whatever they may be. She sat down, wiping away a tear. The judge nodded and turned to Colin. The boy stood, visibly nervous but resolute. Your Honor, my sister and I have tried every day since this happened to understand how we could have been so blind. Our father isn't perfect. No one is. But he never deserved what we did to him. Colin briefly glanced at Maxwell before continuing. We were offered everything we wanted by people who only valued us as weapons against our father, and we let them use us that way. There is nothing I can say to fix that. He swallowed hard. If the court grants my father custody, I will accept any rules or restrictions he puts in place. If not, I will understand. Either way, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the Thornton name again. The courtroom fell silent as Colin returned to his seat. The judge reviewed her notes before addressing Maxwell. Mr. Thornton, do you wish to respond to your children's statements? Maxwell slowly rose, buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, I have listened to my children's words today, as I have observed their actions over the past 3 months. They speak of facing consequences and taking responsibility. These are values I have tried to instill in them from a young age. He paused, his tone measured and controlled. The decisions that brought us to this courtroom were not made overnight. They evolved through hundreds of small choices, each one leading us further from what family should mean. Rebuilding what has been broken will also require many small choices, moving in a better direction. Maxwell turned slightly, making direct eye contact with his children for the first time in months. I am prepared to undertake that process with appropriate boundaries and expectations. The judge nodded. Given the circumstances and the preferences expressed by the minors, I grant full custody to Maxwell Thornton, with a review in 6 months to ensure the arrangement remains in the children's best interests. After the formalities were concluded, Maxwell exited the courtroom with Oliver, the teenagers following at a respectful distance. In Anna's private room, reserved for participants, Maxwell finally turned to face his children directly. "There are conditions," he stated without preamble. "You will both continue your community service obligations. Your devices and communications will be monitored. You will meet weekly with Dr. Harrington for counseling. Sierra, you will complete high school before considering college applications. Colin, your grades must improve dramatically." The siblings nodded silently, accepting every condition without protest. "You will not return to the mansion immediately. I have leased an apartment near my penthouse where you will live under supervision. Privileges will be earned, not assumed." "We understand," Sierra said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Maxwell's expression remained stern, unyielding. Trust once broken is not easily rebuilt. I don't know if it can ever be fully restored. That depends on your future choices. "What about forgiveness?" Colin asked hesitantly, his gaze fixed on his father. Maxwell's blue eyes were cold as Arctic ice. "Forgiveness is not part of this arrangement. Forgiveness is a gift I am not prepared to offer. What I am offering is an opportunity to reconstruct, nothing more." The teenagers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them before Sierra spoke. "That's fair, more than fair, considering everything. Oliver will provide the details. We are done here." Maxwell moved toward the door, then paused. "And one last thing. The Thornton name is not a birthright. It is earned through loyalty, integrity, and strength. Remember that." With those parting words, he left, the door closing firmly behind him. 6 weeks later, Maxwell stood in his penthouse office, reviewing surveillance footage from the apartment where his children now lived. Sierra was diligently studying for exams, and Colin was working on a history project. Both were meticulously adhering to all the conditions he had set, without complaint or negotiation. Tanner entered with the evening security report. "Everything is in order at both residences. The children are strictly following their approved schedules." Maxwell nodded absently, his attention drawn to another monitor displaying Veronica in her prison uniform during a supervised attorney visit. She looked defeated, her once confident posture now broken. She requested another meeting with prosecutors, Tanner reported, offering further testimony against Preston in exchange for a reduced sentence. "Denied," Maxwell replied dryly, his voice devoid of emotion. She made her choice. Later that night, Maxwell stood alone on his penthouse balcony, watching the city lights shimmer through a light haze. His phone chimed with a message, the daily report from Sierra and Colin's counselor, noting their continued progress and commitment to the therapeutic process. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and raised his glass in a silent toast to the Seattle skyline. The game was over. He had won completely, just as he had planned from the beginning. His enemies were ruined, his fortune secure, his company flourishing, his reputation restored and even enhanced by his seemingly benevolent decision to take back his wayward children. Yet victory tasted different than he had envisioned in those dark days after the funeral. There was satisfaction, certainly, cold and precise, but it was accompanied by something unexpected. Not regret, certainly. Maxwell Thornton did not indulge in regrets. Perhaps it was simply the realization that even the most decisive victory had its cost. His phone rang, a secure line, used only by his most trusted circle. Tanner's voice came through with an uncharacteristic urgency. "There's been an incident at the children's apartment. Colin collapsed during dinner. Possible allergic reaction." Paramedics are en route. Something shifted in Maxwell's expression, a crack in the perfect control. I'm on my way. At the hospital, Maxwell strode through the emergency department with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding. A doctor met him at the entrance to the treatment area. Mr. Thornton, your son is stabilized, the doctor said, his voice reassuring. A severe shellfish allergy complicated by elevated stress levels. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but he should make a full recovery. Maxwell nodded curtly. Where is he? The doctor led him to a curtained-off cubicle where Colin lay pale against the white sheets, an IV in his arm and monitoring equipment beeping steadily. Sierra sat by the bedside, clutching her brother's hand. Seeing her father, she quickly stood. I'm sorry, she blurted out. We didn't know he was allergic to shrimp. It wasn't on any of the medical forms. He developed the allergy when he was 12, Maxwell replied, stepping closer to the bed. After the last time you ate shellfish together. Colin's eyes fluttered open. Dad, he whispered weakly. Sorry about this. Maxwell studied his son's face, features echoing his own, a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to see for months. Without a word, he reached out and adjusted the thin hospital blanket, pulling it higher over Colin's chest, a gesture of parental care so automatic it seemed to surprise even himself. Rest, he simply said. Then to Sierra, you should go home. Security will take you. I want to stay with him, she protested, then quickly added, if that's allowed. Maxwell paused, weighing the request against his meticulously constructed system of earned privileges. Fine, I will stay as well. Throughout the night, Maxwell remained in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, working on his tablet while Sierra eventually dozed in another chair. Periodically, he would look up to check the monitors or observe Colin's breathing. Once, when a nurse came to adjust medication, Maxwell meticulously questioned her about dosages and potential side effects. His protective instinct was evident beneath the businesslike demeanor. Closer to dawn, Sierra awoke to find her father standing by the window, watching the first pale rays of light break over the city. Why did you file for custody? She asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. After everything we did, you could have just let us go into the system. No one would have blamed you. Maxwell didn't turn from the window. The Thornton name. Is that the only reason? An obligation to a family name? For a long moment, Maxwell was silent. When he finally spoke, there was something in his voice Sierra hadn't heard in years, a rare note of uncertainty. When I watched those videos, saw you both laughing with Preston, planning your lives without me, I wanted to cut you off completely, to remove you from my life as you had removed me from yours. He turned slightly, his profile silhouetted against the brightening sky. But then I remembered something my father once told me. What was that? Sierra asked softly, her curiosity piqued. That the true measure of strength is not what you can destroy, but what you choose to rebuild. Maxwell finally turned to face her fully. I don't know if we can rebuild this family. The foundation may be too damaged, but not to try would be a failure I am not prepared to accept. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even warmth. But in the economy of emotion that governed Maxwell Thornton's world, it was an opening, narrow and conditional, but real. From the hospital bed, Colin suddenly spoke, his voice clearer than before. Mom told us you never really loved us, that you only saw us as extensions of yourself. Maxwell's expression tightened, a subtle tension in his jaw. Your mother said many things that served her purposes. But was she right? Colin pressed, his voice unwavering. Maxwell looked at his children, weighing his answer. Love is not a simple emotion. It is complex, especially for someone like me. But everything I built, everything I did, was to secure your future, to make you strong enough to stand in a world that does not forgive weakness. Even when that meant letting us fall? Sierra asked, her gaze steady. Sometimes, especially then. Maxwell checked his watch, a subtle shift back to his more pragmatic self. The doctor will be making rounds soon. We should discuss your return to school, Colin, and what accommodations you'll need during your recovery. Just like that, the moment of vulnerability closed. the walls reassembling around Maxwell's carefully guarded inner life. Yet something had changed, a microscopic shift in the family's geometry that all three recognized but none openly acknowledged. 6 months later, on a clear December evening, Maxwell hosted a small dinner at his penthouse. Sierra and Colin, now living there under strict but gradually softening conditions, had prepared the meal as part of their ongoing efforts to demonstrate responsibility. Over dinner, the conversation remained largely formal, discussions of school projects, company developments, and community service experiences. But occasionally, brief moments of something akin to normal family interaction emerged. Colin told a joke that elicited a reluctant half-smile from Maxwell. Sierra described an art installation that sparked genuine interest from her father. After dinner, as Sierra cleared the dishes, Colin approached Maxwell on the balcony. "I heard Mom's appeal was denied," he said carefully, "and Preston's additional charges for trying to contact her from jail." Maxwell nodded. "Justice is running its course." Colin hesitated, gathering his courage. "Did you ever wonder if there could have been another way? Could you have stopped them without all the collateral damage? Without the public humiliation, the criminal charges, the irreparable reputational harm?" Maxwell finished, his voice steady and even. He turned fully to face his son. "There is always another way, Colin. I chose the path that would be most complete, most final, most merciless." "Merciless," Colin echoed softly, the word hanging in the crisp night air. "Yes," Maxwell admitted without apology. "Mercy can be a weakness when dealing with those who mistake it for opportunity." "Even with family?" Maxwell's gaze was unwavering. "Especially with family. The closer a person is to you, the more devastating their betrayal. The response must be proportionate." Colin nodded slowly, digesting this harsh philosophy. "I guess I understand now. Not just what you did, but why." He looked out at the city lights, a vast, complex tapestry. "I don't want to be like Preston, taking what isn't mine, betraying people who trust me. But I don't know if I can be like you." For the first time in their recent interactions, something akin to approval flickered in Maxwell's eyes. "Good. You are not meant to be like me. You are meant to be better, learn my methods without adopting my limitations." Inside, Sierra called out that dessert was ready. As they turned to enter, Maxwell briefly placed a hand on Colin's shoulder, a gesture so unexpected the boy almost flinched. "The Thornton name does not demand that you be merciless," Maxwell said softly. "Only that you be strong enough to protect what matters, by whatever means necessary." It was not forgiveness. Maxwell Thornton did not forgive betrayal. It was not reconciliation in any traditional sense. But in the complex calculus of this family's new reality, it was an acknowledgement that reconstruction had begun, brick by painstaking brick, on a foundation forever altered, but not entirely shattered. Closer to midnight, Maxwell stood alone on the balcony after the children had retired to their rooms. His phone displayed a notification from the prison system. Veronica's final appeal for review had been denied, ensuring she would serve her full sentence. He closed the notification without emotion and looked out at his city. Everything had unfolded as he had designed. His enemies were vanquished, his fortune secure, his company thriving. The cost had been steep, trust irrevocably broken, innocence lost, family bonds reconstructed as strategic alliances rather than unconditional ties. Was it worth it? The question remained unanswered in the cold night air. Maxwell Thornton, the architect of both destruction and rebirth, raised his glass in a solitary toast to the empire he had protected at all costs, acknowledging the truth that had guided him from the very beginning. In the game of power and betrayal, there are no true victories, only varying degrees of calculated sacrifice.